Paul, do you have anything like Black Friday in the UK? I know this looks bizarre to you. It looks bizarre to us.
Well, one of the things that, I noted in previous years was the fact that this was an American tradition, that we weren't seeing similar rabid scenes of rampaging hordes in Europe. But actually, there are articles out today where indeed it has been imported into the UK.
Oh, no.
While it's not as aggressive and rabid and zombie-like as it is in America, the trend is crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So yes, it is being imported now into Britain, as most American cultural icons are.
Give it time. The kind of Black Friday madness will start metastasizing all over the UK, just like McDonald's and Burger King's, right?
Well, we had the Uber Black Friday a couple of years ago with the mass riots of everybody trashing shopping malls and stealing things. So, we're doing it on a professional level.
I thought the video you did was great. Looking at these alternating clips between zombie movies and shoppers and Walmart, I think I would take my chances with the zombies.
Well, they're slower moving, aren't they? They're not as aggressive as George A. Romero's Undead. But the funny thing about that video was, it's a 2-minute video. I spliced together about 20 different clips, almost half of which were, short clips from Dawn of the Dead, the dystopian classic.
Yeah.
But after I rendered the video and uploaded it to YouTube, there's actually a sequence between a clip of Black Friday shoppers being let into a store, rushing the gates and being let into a store. And then it cuts to another overhead clip of a similar scene of people rushing into a store as the barricades are lifted. I don't actually know. I forgot if that is actually from Dawn of the Dead or from Black Friday shoppers. I don't know where it comes from. Because
the line blurs between reality and the movies, right?
But I was genuinely baffled. I was thinking, is that Black Friday or is that Dawn of the Dead? Because I genuinely forgot. So, I mean, that's how scary it is. But as I mentioned at the end of the video, if this is how Americans behave over electronic goods, which they don't really need and they can't afford, how will they react when the food runs out? Because what you're seeing in these videos, psychologically speaking, is how people behave when they perceive scarcity. Mm-hmm. So, imagine it's not HD televisions they're fighting over, but food in a bread line. It's going to get pretty rough, which is a very good argument for storable food.
Yeah. In this case, it's just, as you mentioned, in this case, it's just perception. And what does this tell us when that perception turns into reality, when people are genuinely hungry and they really have to have something, whether it's food or whether it's health care? It's going to turn from this kind of scene into a kind of cannibalism that we've seen over and over again in the Soviet Union or in China, other places where a kind of socialism has descended and they've shut down the system either intentionally or just out of total incompetence. And we see people very quickly having to turn on each other to survive.
Exactly. And you mentioned socialism, communism. I see these Black Friday scenes as another argument against collectivism. The bigger the crowd, the bigger the social group, the more selfish and brutal it appears to become. So whereas the argument, with collectivism is for the greater good, everybody bands together, we treat each other the same, we take care of everybody. As these scenes show in America, the opposite happens. People become more brutal and selfish. The strong men rule, the weak suffer. So whereas a society based on individualism, which is based on a moral foundation of protecting everybody's rights and having true equality, would, resemble a more free, more fair society, more caring for other people, this to me represents collectivism. It's selfish. The bigger the crowd gets, the more selfish they get, which is, from the social psychology angle, extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds. It all goes back to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And what you see is, combine this with these knockout games that are happening here, you see a total devaluation, a total disrespect for other people as people, and you see this shopping that's going on Thursdays. I see a breakdown of the family. We'll be right back.
I'm Darren McBreen, and these are some of the new items that are available now at InfoWarsShop.com.
Alert the public to Obama's blatant abuse of power with the new Obama t-shirt. Obama's Joker face on the front and come and take it on the back. It's time to publicly call him out for what he is, a tyrant. Defend the Second Amendment with our top seller Come and Take It t-shirts. And look at that, women's cut tank tops and t-shirts now available. Nice hat. Plus the Don't Tread on Me flag. And now you can become a micro distributor of the InfoWars magazine. Plus, get your own copy delivered right to your door each and every month. And if you're tired like I am of you and your family being exposed to polluted drinking water, get the Pro One high performance water filter. It gets rid of all pathogenic bacteria, cyst, fluoride, heavy metals, and numerous other contaminants.
So join the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex on this Friday after Thanksgiving. And I'm talking to Paul Joseph Watson of Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. And he did a video earlier today about the contrast between Walmart craziness and violence in the shopping centers and contrasted that to zombies. You know, Paul, we had also a tradition here in America that unfortunately we see being gobbled up with this Black Friday, and that's Thanksgiving. That was a time that was also a period of time that was kind of unique to the United States. You don't have Black Friday in UK, as you mentioned, it's starting to come in, but with Thanksgiving, it was really a nice thing that we had here in America. It was a time that families reflected on what they meant to each other, what had happened in the last year, what God had done in their lives, the blessings that they had had. And it was a time that was kind of rooted in a remembrance of a real hardship that the first settlers from Europe who came to this country experienced when they came here, a time of starvation and privation and how they pulled themselves out of that. That seems to be being eclipsed now by this more shallow consumerism that's being pushed on us by the big box retailers.
Well, if you actually read the motivation behind some of these people who engage in this behavior, they will justify it by saying that time, that shopping time, is time spent with their loved ones. And they've actually grouped themselves together into a kind of Hunger Games style team. And they treat this as a competition, this rabid, mad dash to get products off shelves. They treat it as a sport. That's what they say in the interviews that I read today. And of course, the motivation to get a deal is complete bunkum because, you know, they mark the prices up months before Black Friday anyway, so then the discounts seem more value than they actually are. The 98% markup on the other products that the shoppers buy while they're in there compensates for it for the big retailers. So they actually make larger profit margins during the holiday season, proving that, you know, the idea that they're losing big on giving all these massive discounts is a complete hoax. So that's not the motivation really now that people engage in this Black Friday zombie madness. It's a sport, it's a competition, it's a Hunger Games style bread and circus. And you know, it's the acquisition of physical objects, otherwise known as retail therapy, which is another mechanism through which people drown out the nagging voice of conscience and the hopelessness in many cases of their real lives. They're trying to tune out of reality.
Yeah, Alex was just talking about that earlier this week. He was out earlier this week in Dripping Springs, and he was hiking through the wilderness, and he talked to people, and they said, you know, we like what you have to say, we agree with what you say, but it's just so depressing, we can hardly listen to it. And he was making the case that, you know, reality is what it is. You need to face it and then do something positive about it. You're not going to feel any better by just ignoring this until it comes crashing down on you, and the consequences of ignoring the problems just continually build until everything implodes on you. That's what we're telling people. But as you're pointing out, people like to just ignore that. They like to look at the happy news that's being presented by the media. They like to not look too carefully at the clouds on the horizon.
Well, again, it's a hoax. I mean, knowledge is power, but it's also happiness. I find the more knowledge I acquire, the happier I get. I mean, in terms of consumerism, you know, 10 years ago when I first got my first decent paycheck, yes, I would buy items that I didn't need, didn't really want, just because I could. But I find, I don't know about you, David, but as you mature more spiritually, objects actually repel you. The more physical objects you acquire, the more weighed down you feel.
That's right.
And you start moving towards a kind of minimalist thing where the less objects around you, the happier you are. So, you flip the complete other way.
Yeah, it is. It is actually a burden that you start to feel. They couldn't put it any better than that. I realized that when we started moving here from North Carolina, how many things just started accumulating over the decades, and you just want to get rid of these millstones around your neck is what they feel like, and that's just materialism. What you really value is the connections with other people, and that's what I see being lost in not only this consumerism, but also in these knockout games. Because in the past, we were seeing this kind of violence in Walmart on Black Friday, but now it's coming out where just for the sheer fun of it. As you mentioned, they've turned Black Friday into a kind of a Hunger Games game. Well, they're turning brutalizing other people into a game. There's absolutely no feeling for other human beings.
And again, that relates back to social media, where, like video games, there's no requirement to see other people to treat them as equal human beings, like in social media. And then, of course, happy slapping in the UK, which is what, the knockout game is in America. And again, it's all about narcissism, getting your videos on YouTube, getting them on social media. That all feeds into it.
Wow, that's amazing. We're talking to Paul Joseph Watson in England, and we're going to be right back. And Paul, we had a story that we covered earlier this week that you covered, was up on Drudge, about killer robots. And we're going to touch on that as we come back, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Introducing Pro One. All of your filtration in one system, portable, on the go. No more do you have 2 or 3 filters to just reduce sodium fluoride. You have a system that cuts out the sodium fluoride and up to 95% of hydrofluorosilicic acid. Advanced manufacturing technology combines silver-impregnated white ceramic with new Aquamedics advanced media for removal of fluoride and other heavy metals, all in one filter element. It is the only one that does it, and out of the gates, we have it discounted at 10% off with promo code WATER. This is the only system that in one unit helps reduce or remove pesticides, herbicides, chloramines, ammonia, and chlorine, hydrofluorosilicic acid, the most common form of fluoride not covered by other fluoride filter brands, and sodium hexafluorosilicate. Get your Pro Pure with the new Pro One filter today at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling 888-253-3139.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex on this Friday after Thanksgiving. I've got Paul Joseph Watson on the line from the UK. But before we go back to Paul, and actually, Paul, we can talk about what Mark has to say. I've got Mark from the District of Columbia that's been hanging for over an hour, and I want to get his comments on Black Friday, and we can talk about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the killer robot campaign that Noel Sharkey was on the show a couple of days ago. Mark, DC, what did you want to tell us about Black Friday?
How are you, sir?
Doing fine.
First of all, I'm boycotting Black Friday, and I just urge everybody else to do so. I spent last night, I stumbled onto something, really a whole book online called the Nazi Hydra in America. And it breaks down so much of what you guys talk about. It's frightening. This gets into 4 generations of the Bush clan, totally tied with Nazis. Alan Dulles, head of CIA, fired by Kennedy, total Nazi. John J. McCloy, who I have not heard you guys talk about, maybe you have before, but this is a man who, this is the guy who made sure that the trains to the death camps were not bombed. He's the guy who oversaw the internment camps for the Japanese. He's the guy put in charge of post-war Germany and let all the mass murdering head Nazis right out of prison. And he was put on the Warren Commission. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
The fix was in. This is a guy who was the head of the World Bank. He was the head of the CFR. He's considered one of the great wise men of foreign policy. And he's one of the biggest scumbags in American history. I spent a degree from a major, very well-renowned university, which I won't name right now, and I studied foreign policy. I studied government and politics. And not once was this man's name, other than briefly in passing, did it ever come up. And it's just like a glass of cold water thrown in your face when you wake up to some of this material.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, again, there's so many parallels. It's in post-World War I Germany, depressed economy, putting the fluoride in the water just like the Nazis did. Basically controlling all American media back in the day was totally pro-Nazi, leading up to and all the way.
Oh yeah, there were a lot of financial ties to the Bush family, the patriarch Prescott Bush, and of course, there are a lot of books that talk about this. One of the ones that I thought was really very interesting about Operation Paperclip was A Terrible Mistake. It was about the death of Frank Olson, and he was a scientist who worked for the biological and chemical research departments of the CIA, and it was interesting. It's very, very well-researched, very factual book based on recently declassified documents that were classified for 50, 60 years. It breaks down in that book the story of what happens to this scientist who went along with all this criminal activity. And that's what we're trying to tell people over and over again, to the policemen who stand there a week ago pushing back people about free speech protests. We're saying, this is the world that you're creating. You're going to have to live in this, and they're going to turn on you. Don't think that you're getting a pass from all of this. You're going to be one of the ones that they turn against, just like they turned against the scientist Frank Olson. And also in part of that book, they pointed out how these Nazi scientists, these Japanese scientists who had been involved in war crimes, how they were brought to the U.S., they were given very high-level positions in the research departments. But I think you made a good point there. Thank you so much for calling and for hanging on for such a long time, Mark, in D.C. I think the point he was making, too, at the beginning there, Paul, was about boycotting. Not just Black Friday, but especially boycotting what's going on Thanksgiving. If you don't show up, they're not going to make the employees leave their families to go work on those days, are they?
Well, that's right. And there's actually a growing backlash. The BBC did a report on it today. Against Black Friday. They've got a boycott day, which is the Buy Nothing Day, I believe it's called. And also trending on Twitter, hashtag Black Friday body count. Actually, numerous injuries last night and today. Of course, 4 people have died since 2006.
Wow.
Shootings, stabbings, everything going on today. But even the BBC is now reporting that there's a massive backlash against it. So hopefully the kind of scenes that we've witnessed are on the wane.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Now, a week ago, it was just a week ago, that Alex and crew were in Dallas doing a free speech protest because the city government had shut down any demonstrations, did not allow people like Jim Tague, who had been one of the people that was shot on that fateful day, would not allow him in because he did not uphold to the official story about what happened that day. So Alex and crew went up there to protest this restriction of free speech, and you and I were not there, but I know you were watching, I was watching, as we saw the police come out and push back on the demonstrators. They were led into this area by other police, and then the federal police, the sheriffs who were coming out of Homeland Security trailer just came out and started immediately hitting, punching people, shoving them. As I looked at that, I was thinking about how robotic they looked and how dangerous they looked when they stood there in line, the contempt on these people's face. But there's a real concern about killer robots. We talked on Tuesday to Noel Sharkey. Actually, it was Wednesday. We talked to Noel Sharkey about the campaign to stop killer robots. I know that he's in the UK. You've been following him. You did an article on that interview that got picked up by the Drudge Report. And he had an amazing revelation there that you use as a headline, and that is he fully expected to see robots used for crowd control, armed with tasers.
Well, that's right. And I mean, it's coming sooner than you think. But he actually did a report a few months ago now called 2084 Big Robot is Watching You. Mm-hmm. And Sharkey predicted that within the next 30 years, quote, humanoid walking robots would be more in use for crowd control at games, strikes and riots. Robots will patrol city centers and trouble spots where fights are likely to break out. So there he's talking about them being armed with tasers. Already, I did a video report back in April about some technology out of Zurich University, which they said would be used for homeland security purposes. And even the inventor of that drone technology said it could be used to, quote, abuse humans. And that was a network of, could be, yeah. And that was the creator of the technology. But it was basically a network of drones that carried nets. and they said it could be used to snatch suspects off the streets. So they're talking about that already. They've got rudimentary drones that already do that. They're quite small at the moment, but they're going to ramp it up.
This is really horrific stuff that we're looking at. When I look at this, when we saw the trailer for the movie Elysium, that's exactly what we saw. We saw these brutal robots just smacking people who are standing in line, used for crowd control and law enforcement. I had high hopes for that movie. It turned out to be a very cheap analogy for Obamacare and illegal immigration. It didn't really seem to address that, but that was a very powerful scene that was in the trailer. It's something that I think people should be very concerned about. And he's going around and talking to the UN and talking to the governments, raising awareness of the public, raising awareness in the press. But I want to see more awareness raised of the scientists who are creating these things, just like I was talking about Frank Olson in the past segment. You know, when you're a scientist and you're doing something, or an engineer, it's not just enough to tackle something because it's an intellectual problem that you can solve. You need to think about how it's going to be used, the ethical consequences of it.
Well, the vast majority of this technology is being developed by DARPA, which, of course, is the Pentagon.
Yes.
And people like Sharkey and others have said that these robots are going to be used to kill people. That's their ultimate, application. And DARPA has even admitted that in several different instances. They're now starting to roll them out on the battlefield. But initially, it's going to be about, as you said, robots checking IDs at checkpoints, alerting authorities if necessary to suspects, and anyone can be a suspect now. And in fact, you mentioned Elysium. The new RoboCop film actually depicts robots patrolling the streets of Iraq, biometrically scanning citizens' faces against a database. And one of the plot lines of the films is, Americans are robophobic. They won't accept this.
That's right.
So,
and of course, that was being, in the film, that was being driven by the military-industrial complex, or we could say the police-state-industrial complex now. The same people that have been creating these weapons of war that have kept the United States at war continuously for the last 60 years, those same large corporations are looking for increased profits. They're never satisfied. They always want, as Rockefeller said, just a little more. And the way they're going to get that is to create this police state industrial complex, sell the weapons. They're already bringing the weapons home from Iraq and Afghanistan, but they want to create new crowd control weapons, as they call them, non-lethal weapons. But they're not lethal, they're not non-lethal at all. We see people dying from tasers all the time.
Well, precisely. And I think the point is about handing that power over to robots is, by making them autonomous, you remove the responsibility for death or injury. If it was the robot's decision to go ahead and taser somebody who ended up dying, then they're not going to fear for legal retribution, are they? And there's going to be no chain of responsibility behind that.
Yes.
So that's one of the benefits for law enforcement authorities. But the key point is, we already have flying robots killing people all over the world. They're called Predator drones.
Yes.
They kill 50 innocent civilians for every suspected terrorist they take out. So to think of this as some way off in the future thing is naive, because it's already happening.
Yes.
Way up, if you want to get way into the future, then even the co-founder of Skype wrote that the eventual progression of robots will be about them taking over, quote, the speed and direction of technological progress itself, and actually shaping the environment of planet Earth to their own ends. So once these robots get some kind of sentient intelligence and under their own auspices have a survival mechanism, then you're going to find that they shape their environment for their own purposes. And as the co-founder of Skype said, we're just going to be, a bug on the windscreen to them. They don't care about us. So that's where it's going in the future. That's where people like Ray Kurzweil have said that it's heading.
And when Ray Kurzweil looked at the Atlas robot that DARPA funded, his comments were, oh, that's great. Now all it needs is a brain. I'm looking at this thing and I'm saying, do we want to give that kind of monopoly of force to a few people in government? Because that's what's happening with these drone strikes. It's a few people that can remotely control a tremendous amount of force. It gives a tremendous amount of leverage to the government, to the police department to use against people. It's a very disturbing trend, in my opinion, and we need to get people to understand just how imminent and how dangerous this is. It seems like science fiction to so many people, and yet we can see these robots that are being built by Boston Dynamics, and I find them to be very frightening because I can see the potential for abuse because we already see that technology being abused, as you mentioned, with the drone strikes.
Exactly. And I think ultimately it's about the total obliteration of human liberty on an industrial mechanized scale.
Exactly.
That's what it's ultimately about, because once you give these robots power of sentient awareness and the power to act on their own accord, they're just going to kill people because it's in their own interest to do so. If they're in a battlefield mode, they're being developed by DARPA, the Pentagon. And the Pentagon's actually developed a device that thinks and looks like a human brain, which they plan to install in these robots so they can navigate completely of their own accord and they can learn as they progress through their environment. So they've already got brains, human-like brains developed, synthetic brains, which they plan to put into these robots. So it's frightening where it's going. But you mentioned Kurzweil again. You know, the trendy transhumanists all seem to worship him as this icon of the technological singularity. But if you actually read his book, which I don't think many of them have from cover to cover, The Age of Spiritual Machines, his lust for, you know, robotics and transhumanism, it comes across to me as some kind of creepy sexual fetish. If you actually get to the end of the book, he talks about a woman leaving her husband for a computer, uploading her own intelligence into the computer so that she can then have sex with the computer. And then at the end of the book, Kurzweil joins in as a kind of threesome. It's completely creepy. I think his whole thing is based on some weird sexual fetish. I mean,
and he also thinks that he's going to live forever. You know, that's the original lie from the Garden of Eden, that you'll become like God. He really does think he's going to become like God. Even if he could transfer his mental processes and make a copy of his brain, essentially, and put it in a robotic thing, that's still not him. That's just a copy of him. He's still going to die. He doesn't want to come to the grips with that fact, and so he is working towards this crazy invention that he's got. But it's also very disturbing because we realize where this is headed. We realize how dangerous this is, and we realize that even though he's not going to be able to really transfer himself into a robot, these people could kill an awful lot of people. It's just like the Artilect Wars. I don't know if you've seen that book or not, where the guy's talking about gigadeath between people who are pushing this artificial intelligence and the people who are trying to push back against it, people that he calls the Terrans. And he predicts that the author of that book predicts that that's going to happen and that we're going to have billions of people die. It's going to be one of the most horrific periods of human history, but they think they're going to win. They think the Artilects will win. They think the transcendent, transhumanist singularity people are going to win.
I think a lot of it, David, is the fact that Kurzweil especially is just a very insecure individual who has a massive fear of death. And this is how he compensates for it.
Yes, exactly.
That's how it comes across to me.
And he has a lot of financial resources behind him now, being chief scientist for Google. So there's a lot of money behind it. I mean, Google is funding this race to the moon. I think it ends December 31st, 2015. Somebody can get to the moon. They can fly or travel across its surface a certain distance, make a couple of broadcasts or whatever. There's a large prize involved in that. Google has so much money that they can fund these development projects. Now, there's nothing harmful with the moon launch, but some of this other stuff, even taking away our ability to drive our own cars, that's where the Google self-driving cars are headed. You're going to find people that are going to be priced out in the insurance market, the compulsory insurance market that we have here in the United States. If you want to drive your own car, I'm sure that's going to be at a premium because, of course, the cars can do it so much more safely than you'll be able to do it. They're going to basically shut us down and control our movements in their entirety with that.
Well, that's what Renault recently announced with their electric cars. You're going to rent the battery off them and they can shut it down at any point. So it's outside of your control again. In a car, in 2013, you're basically sitting inside a computer, not a vehicle, and that's only going to get more sophisticated. But with Google, I mean, Google is Skynet. they're creating an artificial reality which people are going to be able to insert themselves into and live an alternative life. They're behind all of this stuff. It's not going to apply to the majority of people.
One of the things that Professor Sharkey was talking about was the rapid development of technology in fighter jets and the consequences that might have for war. When we come back, let's talk about what's going on in China right now. We'll be right back with Paul Joseph Watson from the UK, so stay tuned.
I had tried everything. I'd cut back the amount of food I was eating. I was lifting weights and jogging, but nothing was working. My body was literally starving for minerals and trace elements as well as key vitamins. And as soon as I had that, I immediately could eat half of what I was eating previously and be satisfied. Now, there are hundreds of great products at InfoWarsTeam.com, but I want to point out the 3 that have helped me lose 37 pounds in just 2 months. Products like Beyond Tangy Tangerine, Pollen Burst, and Rebound. When I started taking the Tangy Tangerine and other products every day, I lost more than 37 pounds in just 2 months. Now that's results. I want to challenge my listeners to go to InfoWarsTeam.com and to order just 3 of their products, and you will see the changes in the way you look, feel, and in your appetite almost immediately. Start your journey to health and wellness today. InfoWarsTeam.com.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. On this Friday after Thanksgiving, I'm talking to Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. And Paul and I were just talking about Dr. Noel Sharkey's campaign to stop killer robots. And when he was on 2 days ago, he was talking about the rapid development of technology in unmanned aerial vehicles that are fighter jets, traveling at supersonic speeds, taking off and landing on aircraft carriers. The amazing advances that are being made in that. And as we're looking at that, Paul, I'm thinking about how easy it's going to be for governments to get into a war when they feel like they don't have as much to lose if they're just going to lose an unmanned aerial vehicle. But eventually, as Dr. Sharkey pointed out, it's going to come down to people dying, isn't it?
Well, exactly, because, you're going to have humanitarian concerns that are caused by any war. But yeah, they eventually plan to roll out huge battlefield armies of robots to fight each other under that justification that humans won't be slaughtered in the process. If you believe that wars can be fought without humans dying, then I think you're very much naive.
Yeah, and eventually one side of robots is going to start killing humans, at least one side of those robots. Now, what's happening with China now, we see there's this map. Pull up this map, guys, for the viewers that are looking at it on CNN. We see these multiple overlapping claims of territory that are conflicts between Taiwan and China and South Korea and Japan. And what we see here really is kind of looks like a Venn diagram, but it's really a Venn diagram for war. It's amazing to look at these aerial shots of these islands and you don't see anything on them, but we've seen people go to war for lesser things, haven't we, Paul?
Well, World War I started with the assassination of a relatively obscure Archduke in Sarajevo.
That's right.
Having normalcy bias and thinking this can't happen to our generation is short-sighted. But this is about, obviously, the Senkaku Islands, the East China Sea. China set up this air defense zone, which, by the way, Japan, US, and Russia have had for decades over their own territories. But apparently, China's not allowed to do that. Almost immediately, the US sent in 2 B-52 bombers in an astounding provocation. This was all while Americans were fighting over Xboxes, by the way, literally sliding into World War III. But Ambrose Evans Pritchard, who is with The Telegraph, he's no tinfoil hat wearing lunatic, said, quote, "We are clearly sliding into a new Cold War. One misjudgment by either side could change our world entirely." So now you've got Japan, South Korea flying their warplanes into this zone. Now you've got military professors in China saying that if they keep doing this provocation, quote, China will be forced to respond. And they issued a veiled threat last weekend that they would shoot down planes entering this region. So initially, of course, they did nothing. People said, oh, it's just China being a paper tiger again. But they've since issued statements saying that they will take military action if these provocations keep occurring. And imagine if China scrambled warplanes off the coast of America, what the freak-out response would be. And yet this is happening now on an almost daily basis where the US, South Korea, Japan flies through this air zone taunting China with threats to shoot down the aircraft. And, you know, it's bubbling under the surface. It's not a massive story yet, but mainstream commentators are even saying that it could spark a new world war.
Yes. I've seen people make the comparison to the Monroe Doctrine with what's going on in Asia, that, as you mentioned, what would we do if China was doing flights and asserting territorial influence just off the coast of the U.S. or even off the coast of South America? We've seen the Cuban Missile Crisis in the past. But at the same time, China is really pushing it. It's a very dangerous situation. And as you pointed out, though, we're just really concerned about where we're going to get our next video game fix, or where we can find a big screen TV to pacify us for a little bit more time.
Now you can watch Alex Jones live at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
You can also browse the network, the InfoWars Nightly News,
And over 60 movies and documentaries all together in one place.
You can watch the Alex Jones Radio Show live as it happened.
So check it out, Infowars.com/show.